screen starts glowing and the film starts rolling. You wanna be knowing what you might be in for. So give the show a listen and find out what you're missing. Put yourself in position for the easy good score.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the 169th episode of The Goods, a film podcast. I'm here with Brian, as we always are. Brian.
Same procedure as every episode, Dan.
That's right. How's it going this week, Brian?
Pretty good. Summer's almost here.
Yeah? But in the sense of your graduate program, or in the sense of season, or both?
In the sense of the rotation of the Earth.
Yeah.
And I guess the tilt of the axis, because the other hemisphere, it's not the same. I still don't fully believe that. When they say that Australia has summer Christmas, I think that might just be a joke on us Northerners.
Mm-hmm. Right, it's like how they say, you know, there's a hidden swimming pool at your high school.
Yeah.
That you gotta go find on the third floor that you can only get to by the elevator. It's like there's a mythical place called Australia where they have summer Christmases. Oh, yeah, I'm sure there is. Yeah, let's go there someday. They also have weird animals that don't live anywhere else on Earth and try to kill you. And there are these hopping rabbits that keep their babies in pouches. Okay, sure, whatever you say, Grandma. It's like, yeah. The mythical Australia.
Prove us wrong, listeners.
Don't you know someone who moved to Australia?
Yeah, I do.
Is moving to Australia a euphemism for dying or something like that? Going to the down under?
Here be dragons.
Anyways, sorry I'm a little loopy. I'm a little brain dead because I've had a very busy week at work. And in fact, a couple of weeks, I'm kind of right in the guts of a really big project. So makes me wish I had never grown up, Brian.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Never going to be a man. I won't. Like to see somebody try and make me. Anybody who wants to try and make me turn into a man, catch me if you can. As they say in the 1954 Broadway musical.
So we are going to be talking about the 1953 film, Peter Pan. Now, if you grew up with a Peter Pan, this is likely the one you grew up with because it is an animated film released by Walt Disney Animation Studios. I learned as I was researching this that, at least according to Wikipedia, it's studios, not studio, which is what I would have guessed, but I don't know. Walt Disney Animation Studios. So we're going to be discussing this film, and then we're going to do a cool, fun activity that will probably release as a separate episode from this that I'm very excited about. It's my most ambitious podcast organization idea in a while. We're going to do a draft of Walt Disney Animation Studio songs with a couple of guests. And we'll talk about the rules of that and all in that episode. But, you know, with every episode, even if we have a special segment, I always like to have a film discussion separate from it. And in this case, the film is Peter Pan, one I haven't seen since I was a kid prior to this past week. And in many ways, a famous and important Disney film, Brian.
Yeah, I will circle back to this, but I think it's like pretty central to the brand. And part of that, I think, may have been that it was the one that came out right as they were like making Disneyland.
Okay.
And so it just seems like it's maybe the most Disneyland of the bunch. Just the idea of you go to this place and there's fantasy and adventure there, and you can always be a kid. And like, I think it's the spirit of Disneyland.
Oh, so like this is like a mission statement for Disneyland in fairy tale form.
That's kind of how I view it.
Interesting. I like that idea. So we did talk about Walt Disney Animation Studios with our friend Hunter, probably at this point 2 months ago or something like that. I can't remember exactly what it was. And It was a fun conversation. We talked about Snow White then, and I'm a little loath to bring something so similar so soon again, but again, I wanted to talk about something for the draft, so I figured let's bring in something that people are a little bit mixed on these days. Let's something that's a little more controversial, up and down, less consensus. So, Peter Pan is a Silver Age Disney picture. That's the era that you will often see it referred to. The Golden Age, I think people say, are the first 5 Disney movies. And then you had around World War II, you had the package pictures from the 40s. But then, starting with Cinderella in 1950, you had 8 movies that Disney produced. His exact interest, Walt Disney himself, his exact interest and involvement in those 8 films kind of varies. But this one from 1953 is interesting because it was actually one of a bunch of movie ideas that Disney had as a follow-up to Snow White. So he had a whole bunch of ideas of the movies he could do next. And we ended up seeing a lot of them. And some of them got shelved. Alice in Wonderland got shelved. This one got shelved. And then after the war, after they made all their money back with Cinderella again, they started picking up some of the ideas that they had left behind before the war. And one of those was Peter Pan. And my understanding is, even though they had some production on this, they didn't actually use much of what they had done before the war. They essentially started from scratch in the late 40s, maybe 1950.
Yeah, I was wondering what inspired you to return to the animated Disney well so soon.
Mostly, I just really wanted to do this draft, and I couldn't think of a better idea for a draft than this one. You and I, Brian, have talked about Disney songs in the past. We did a list, an article about them on our old blog, earnthis.net, way back in the day. That was a lot of fun. And I thought this would be a fun activity. But out of the Silver Age films, the last one that Disney produced was The Jungle Book before he died. Although he did produce the shorts that ended up becoming The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, which came out a little bit later. One reason that Peter Pan is important is because it was the last Disney film to feature animation work from all 9 of the group called the 9 Old Men. Brian, how much do you know about the 9 Old Men?
Well, they're legendary in animation history. I could probably name a couple. I definitely could not name all 9. I would get more by the first name than by the last name, but there's Ward Kimball is one of them. Are Frank and Ollie among the 9 Old Men?
I think so. Let me look them up right now.
Okay, I think there's Ollie Johnson, Frank somebody. There's Milt Call is one of them.
Frank Thomas, Wooly Reitherman, John Lounsbury, Eric Larson, Ward Kimball, Milt Call, Ollie Johnston, Mark Davis, and Les Clark.
Okay, so I had 4 of them.
So no Isn't there like I don't know, how do you say that? UB?
Yeah, I believe Iwerks parted ways pretty early on, like helped develop Mickey Mouse, and then they had like qualms over who owned Mickey Mouse, who was responsible for Mickey Mouse, and departed, and he had some series called like Talk Cartoons or something with like Jack Frost in the 1930s. That's the one I remember. Or it was, I forget. We got to do more research. But I think he had already parted ways by the time Disney was doing features.
So the name 9 Old Men was originally like an ironic name because they were all pretty young. They were all in their 20s and 30s when Snow White came out, and they just continued working on the Disney side up through, this was, almost 20 years later, and it still had all 9 of them. And one of them worked with Walt Disney Animation Studios up until 1986, which is absolutely crazy. That's almost 50 years after Snow White. That was Eric Larson of the Nine Old Men. But this was the last one where all 9 of them worked here in 53.
And I know Frank and Ollie were around for a while, to the point that they're the guys in The Incredibles who show up as old men at the end of the movie and say, "No school like the old school."
And they're also in Enchanted. There's a bit where some old men and some old ladies dance together, but that's interesting because it's live action. And so you have like the actual people appearing there, not just as voice actors, but they were in shot there, which I thought was pretty cool too.
Also, I looked it up just now, and the Fleischer brothers made the Talk Cartoon series. Ub Iwerks made the Comicolor series, of which Jack Frost was a part.
Gotcha. There you go. So Peter Pan, like I said, one that had been kind of on the Disney radar for a long time. And like most of the early Disney features, it's based on a book. In this case, actually, Peter Pan was first introduced as a side character in a book called The Little White Bird by J.M. Barrie. And then Barrie took the Peter Pan character and made a whole story for him. And it actually started as a play in 1904. So that was like the proper Peter Pan introduction, was the original play, 1904. And then he made it into a novel in 1911. So in 1911, Peter and Wendy, I think it's called, the novel came out. But 7 years earlier, the play Peter Pan or the Boy Who Couldn't Grow Up. So this is the only version of that story that I've ever read or watched. I've never read the book or seen the play. I haven't seen Hook. Haven't seen other versions of the story told in movie format. But Brian, I understand that you have.
Right, I've seen a couple versions. And actually, I only saw the Disney one. It's not one of the tapes that I had growing up. I did watch it when I was like maybe 10 with my cousins had the tape. And after that, I don't think I saw it again until like during the pandemic. Watched it again. That's the 1953. But after the 1953 version, there was a Broadway musical version the next year in 1954, which was televised a couple times, had Mary Martin playing Peter Pan, so a woman in the role. And I had taped off TV like a re-airing of the 1960 broadcast of that. So I had watched that many times. And subsequently, you know, like anything else in Hollywood, it's one of those things they just keep making again and again. So in 2003, there was a version. I think I saw like the first half hour of that in band class at one point. I had a movie pass in 2015. I saw the version that had Hugh Jackman as a pirate. I can't remember if he was Hook. He must, I think he was like Hook, but he didn't have the hook yet. And there's been lots of envisionings of it. There was a movie recently, or at some point, about J.M. Barrie, like a behind the scenes that had Johnny Depp as J.M. Barrie.
Interesting.
Because kind of the story was that he, like, told the Peter Pan stories to the kids of a family friend. Kind of the same deal, but maybe not quite, with Lewis Carroll and Alice in Wonderland. And Hook, obviously, from Steven Spielberg. Which has some differences in that, I mean, the big twist is that what if Peter Pan grew up? But draws a lot still from the original story.
Oh, that's pretty interesting. And I recall you like Hook. It's a pretty divisive film in general, but you're a fan, right?
I do like Hook. I think it's, well, so much of it is lifted by the John Williams score, which is great. But I really like the production design and the color. And I think it captures like a midlife crisis that maybe Spielberg was experiencing.
Gotcha. Yeah, I need to see that one. I mean, I want to catch all my Spielberg someday, for sure. But Maybe that's the next place I go for my Peter Pan fix. Or I've heard people recommend the book, say the book is actually quite good and kind of hits on some of the themes a little more directly than the movie does.
Right, and my sense is that the musical has a lot more taken from the play and the book, like some dialogue taken verbatim. And also, I have seen the Disney sequel, Peter Pan 2: Return to Neverland, which kind of takes the the epilogue at the end of the play as a jumping off point.
Is this like a direct-to-video thing?
It was one of the Disney direct-to-video.
I didn't know they had one for Peter Pan. Peter Pan 2 direct-to-video sequel. Return to Neverland.
Yes, well, it's on Disney Plus, so we can pause the recording. You can go and watch that. It has an octopus in place of the crocodile. Another interesting thing about J.M. Barrie is he left the rights to the story to a children's hospital in London. So, like, ever since, whenever somebody uses Peter Pan, you'll see in the credits copyright to, like, St. Ormond's Children's Hospital. And I think time has passed so that it's public domain as far as America is concerned, but I think people don't like to step on the toes of British orphans and sick children.
So Peter Pan takes place during the Edwardian era, which always gets pointed out whenever you look at Peter Pan. I guess it's like a very specific flavor of English history. It's like the period right before World War One. So like Titanic was what, 1912? Is that right, Brian?
That's correct. What I think is funny about the Edwardian era is it's like 1901 to 1910 or something. It's like 9 or 10 years. You might as well say the Clintonian era.
A great time. But it has kind of like it's still an imperial time for England. And so it's kind of presumed that like you have help taking care of the kids. And so there's a riff on that here, where the nurse taking care of the kids is in fact just a dog.
Right, and it's the same period that like Mary Poppins is depicting, is the Edwardian era.
Okay, so that's the same one, same era. Gotcha. So I think we can maybe just say it up front that a big part of this film's legacy, I don't know how much this extends to all of the Peter Pan books and adaptations, but certainly this one is that it's kind of racist AF towards Native Americans. And I think this was a pretty common thing in culture. I mean, like, you just watch Westerns from 1910s, 1920s up through the 1950s. And like, basically Indians may as well be wild animals, savages chasing you down, you know? But here it kind of really spotlights it, lampshades it with a song, What Makes the Red Man Red. But it's honestly like just baked into the whole premise. Like you have the chief who talks in like a stereotypical Indian chief voice and stuff. And yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think it's interesting how the Native American archetype kind of fascinated the European imagination. So obviously we have it in American culture, but that was like part of the lived experience of the country. But other countries also took something from the stories of Native Americans and formed stereotypes about them. But like here in this British story, we've got the Indian tribe, and also like one of the big figures in German literature, there's a character called Winnetou who's a Native American. And so there were stories about I should know the title of the book, but it's Winnetou is the character, and there's another character named Shatterhand. I think it's the Shatterhand Chronicles or something.
And I was actually struck when we watched Parasite that like the kid in that was still playing American Indians. Like, I guess it's a Korean film, right? And that takes place in Korea, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah. So it's lingered to some extent in the culture.
Right. And devil's advocate maybe a little bit, But in this movie, like, the Lost Boys, the white kids, are really, really racist and condescending to the Indians, but then the Indians are able to take advantage of them because they underestimate them.
Right. It's true.
And they do kind of have like a real, recognized real relationship.
Yeah.
It's like, listen, we have our territory and you have ours, and when we battle, there's like an element of childishness to it, and just recognition that it's for play, which was a little interesting.
Yeah, it's not especially malicious as far as stereotypes go. Like, it's maybe dehumanizing, but it's not like, I don't know. You're right. It still maintains that do they call them Injuns? I can't remember. That they are like people of power and agency. So like there is some respect baked into there, but like I think we still recognize that as dehumanizing, I guess.
Right.
One of my hot takes on this is I think the movie is nearly as sexist as it is racist, or like maybe sexist is overstating it, but like antiquated in its gender roles.
So it's very sexual. It's like a very sexual film.
Oh, I agree with that too. But I guess what I mean is like antiquated gender norms being like both a thrust of the story itself and a source of gags really stuck out to me too, I guess. Like so much of it is like, oh, Wendy, she's such a little lady. Oh, she gets so jealous. Oh, the boys out there will be boys. They're crazy. They won't listen to anyone. Their wild nature will get the better of them. And that's like what drives a lot of the situations and the jokes and stuff. And of course, then you have Tinkerbell, who her whole thing is, I mean, first of all, they really emphasize her womanly figure in the animation. And second of all, like her whole thing is she's totally jealous of Wendy the whole time. That's the premise of the Tinkerbell character.
Right. So every girl on the island loves Peter, but Peter is still too much of a child to feel that way. And so he is just kind of like appreciative that they like him, but also like he's flippant in like a comical way.
Right.
Like not quite oblivious, but yeah. He's flippant with their affections.
Yeah, he like kind of takes advantage of it, yeah, in what he does, and takes it as like a given that he is due that respect, that adoration. I guess we can maybe hop into the story itself now. The story opens with the Darling family getting ready for bed, or at least the kids are getting ready for bed, but the parents are getting ready to go out for the night. And a couple things to know about the Darlings. So there's an older sister who's right on the verge of adolescence, and this is Wendy. And then there's two little kids, two brothers, and they are John and Michael. And I would guess, if I were to guess their ages, Wendy's like, 10? I think John's the older one, right? John is probably in the realm of like 7, and then Michael is in the realm of like 4. It's ballpark that. I don't know actually what it is. A couple interesting things. So Mr. Darling we see, and one tradition is that Mr. Darling is played by the same actor as the Hook actor. Or I guess you would reverse it because you meet Mr. Darling first. Hook is played by the same actor as Mr. Darling. And another casting tradition is that Peter Pan is usually played by a woman, although that is not true in this film. And I think that has become kind of less consistent as time has gone. But traditionally, Peter Pan was played by a woman, which kind of plays up some of the lack of masculinity in Peter Pan, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's like in Avatar: The Last Airbender when they go and they watch the play depicting their adventures at the end of the show. And Aang is being played by a woman. That's
right. That's a good joke.
But yeah, I like the tradition of have the dad actor also play Hook. And I feel like other types of stories, other films that have come subsequently have kind of borrowed that idea, that conceit, like Wizard of Oz or Jumanji does that, where Robin Williams' dad is the same actor as the hunter who's chasing him from the board game.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I like the idea that like the authority and the antagonist are ultimately one and the same, you know?
It's a little like You Belong With Me.
That's a good point. So we're kind of thrown in the middle of their sort of evening, and we learn that one thing that's been ongoing is Wendy telling kids stories about Peter Pan, a boy who never grows old and comes from a place called Neverland. And a couple things about this. Wendy seems to kind of treat it as if it's real. And secondly, this really, really bothers Mr. Darling. It's like, you're being a child, Wendy. You got to start to grow up out of it, you know? And makes the proclamation that Wendy's going to move out of the childhood bedroom and into her own room. Sort of this symbolic transition from childhood to adolescence.
Right, it's a threshold.
And it's treated as an apocalyptic decision.
And the actor playing Mr. Darling, and as we'll soon see Captain Hook, I'm going to say right now, is Hans Conried. So, well, we've had him come up a couple times on the podcast, but for me the big one is The 5,000 Fingers of Dr. T, which was this same year, 1953.
Whoa. Wow, I didn't realize. That's a big year for Hans Conried.
Very big year.
What was the other thing we saw him in? Didn't we see him in something else?
So he was also in the 1977 Rankin Bass Hobbit movie, along with Cyril Ritchard, who played Captain Hook in the Broadway musical in 1954.
Wow.
So Hans Conried was Thorin, the head dwarf, and Cyril Ritchard was Elrond, the head elf. So it was like Hook-a-palooza.
Man, it's crazy, the web of... It's like the Kevin Bacon, degrees of Kevin Bacon, but it's degrees of the goods at this point. Now they're on episode 169, 250-some things discussed. So this animation predates xerography. So it does actually look kind of classically hand-drawn, with some pretty cool backgrounds. I mean, they're not maybe the best in Disney's history, but I really liked the backgrounds in this. It's particularly before we get to Neverland, I was thinking like the look of, I don't know if it's London or whatever English city this is, but like it's almost got like a, we're not quite expressionistic, but like you're really kind of immersed in the city itself. I think it's pretty cool. And honestly, it looked better than I would have guessed from my memory, just more painterly. And
yeah. So my brother works at Disney World, and one of the rides that he helps run, so he does It's a Small World, and then across the alley from It's a Small World is the Peter Pan ride. And so he does shifts running the Peter Pan ride.
That's pretty awesome. You sent me some fun pictures. I don't know if I'm allowed to speak about that, if that's like verboten.
Oh yeah, it's a little verboten, so we'll keep that on the hush hush. But he's just intimately familiar with the layout of the Peter Pan ride, which does have a vignette in it where you're in the little flying boat and you fly over this like diorama of the town that's constructed in such a way that it feels like you're really high up.
That's pretty cool. And so after the parents leave, we see the kids go to bed, and then what should happen but Peter Pan appears on the rooftop. Really cool shot when he appears. Like his face is kind of lit by this lamp, and it's almost like a creepy look for him. I feel like the characterization of Peter Pan is a little inconsistent throughout the film, or like at least tonally inconsistent. But he appears at the Darling's house because he's missing his shadow, which is just this concept always stuck with me. You could lose your shadow. I think it's very creative and like the kind of thing that a kid would be fascinated with. And he has Tinkerbell with him. And of course, everyone who's listening to this knows what Tinkerbell looks like. Striking that she is, I will say again, drawn as with the body of a full-grown woman. And like, not just that, but like, there's a whole like 30-second thing where she notices herself in the mirror and she looks at and like it's like, oh, are my hips too big? Like she's admiring her figure. Like the film is kind of ogling her womanly body as if we should be aware that, I don't know, it has to do with, I think, some of the themes that are under the hood of this film about growing up and what it means to have different gender roles when you grow older and things. I also like the shadow idea because we had kind of seen throughout the setup that the different darlings, we often see their shadows very starkly on the wall. So it kind of primes us to be looking at shadows. And then we have this kind of mini chase scene where he's chasing after his shadow throughout the room. And the shadow like stumbles on the shadow of a stool and stuff. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. So with the shadow first, and then once the flying starts, the animation is really cool. Like really good use of suggested 3D space. It's all flat, but it really seems to have depth the way that Peter Pan can circle around things in these big sweeping movements.
And sure enough, yes, the kids meet Peter Pan and Peter invites them to Neverland. There's some back and forth about, well, who's going to go? And Wendy gets appointed to be the mother of Neverland. And Peter seems totally almost infatuated by Wendy, but not quite. And like kind of fixated on her to the point that Tinkerbell gets really irritated by it. And that's Tinkerbell's thread the rest of the film. Hey, he's thinking about Wendy. He's not thinking about me. And Wendy, I did not remember this from before, but Wendy actually tries to kiss Peter Pan. And it almost happens kind of abruptly. That feels like, I don't know. It's like, I guess you're the pre-adolescent version of romances. You give a smooch to the boy or whatever. But if the point is that she's not yet a teen thinking about those things, why is her first instinct to want to kiss Peter Pan? I was kind of baffled by that. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, so that's from the original play, although instead of a kiss, she gives him a thimble, and I don't know what that's supposed to mean. It's in a lot of adaptations. I don't really understand the thimble. But I think the idea is that, like, maybe girls mature just a little bit faster than boys. At least in this reckoning, in this story. And so just that she is maybe a little bit more mature than Peter is, certainly.
And so Peter gives the whole Darling family, at least the three kids, sufficient magic to go and fly to Neverland. Except the one thing he needs is fairy dust. So he grabs Tinkerbell and uses Tinkerbell to sprinkle some fairy dust on the kids. And so we get the iconic number and scene of, you can fly, you can fly, you can fly, you can fly.
I always thought that was funny anytime they use Tinkerbell as like a salt shaker. It just totally robs her of her, like, ability to do anything.
Her personhood. And one of the things that I remember about this is that in a fairly early YouTube video, not like early YouTube, but was a clip of this song. And the title of the YouTube video is just, think of Batman pooping snakes. And then it's just a clip from You Can Fly, just one line from it. And when you're looking at that sentence and listening to it, it sounds exactly like the singer saying, think of Batman pooping snakes. But it's actually, think of the path that moonbeams take or something like that. But now whenever I see this number, I always think of Batman pooping snakes. A classic mondegreen, which is the word for a misheard lyric. Do you have any favorite mondegreens?
When a man loves a walnut, can't keep his mind on nothing else.
That's pretty good.
That's one of my faves. But this is a little convoluted. So there was a movie in like the last 10 years of Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day. that was adapted by Disney. And one of the characters is Alexander's sister is doing a play, and she's in a play of Peter Pan, playing Peter Pan. So kind of the classic theater convention that the girl is playing Peter Pan. But then when we see her like doing the play, you would think, oh, okay, it's the Broadway musical. It's the 1954 version. Except the only song that we see is they're doing You Can Fly. So it's the Disney songs. It's just an interesting cultural hodgepodge.
Huh.
Like borrowing some aspects from what you would expect from the stage show, and yet still keeping it very in-house at Disney.
That is interesting, yeah. Closing the loop on mondegreens, another one that I like is the song All By Myself. All by myself. There's a funny YouTube rendering of that as Obama's elf. And then again, when you're kind of looking at those words and listening to the song, it really does sound like Obama's elf. All by myself. And there's a picture of an elf singing that next to a picture of Obama. It's pretty funny. And then a guy I knew you knew him too probably, JJ in high school. He would tell us that he for years and years he thought in the song "My Girl" by who does "My Girl"?
Is that the Temptations?
Yeah. They say when it's cold outside, I've got the month of May. So May is warm, as we are discovering right now, Brian. But he said he always thought it was when it's cold outside, I've got the muffins made. Which is a good reinterpretation of that lyric. Like, muffins are warm, yeah.
Yeah, good thing to make when it's cold outside.
So I think of that mishearing of that lyric whenever I hear that song.
I think that's my new favorite. I've got the muffins made.
So then they do indeed fly. Like you said, cool animation sequence. They kind of fly into the stars, and it takes them to this, I guess it's an alternate dimension. It's like not a physical place, or if it is, it's like... and you have to use magic to get there. Right.
So in Disney, it specifies second star to the right and straight on till morning. In the original play, it just says second to the right and straight on till morning. So kind of, I mean, I think adding star in there makes sense, whatever context you're talking about, because otherwise it just seems like you accidentally a word. It's like something is missing if you just say second to the right. But people have speculated, oh, star, are they traveling in space? And it's hard to say. But yes, leaving your world behind.
And going to this place that, first of all, you never grow up when you're there. Honestly, kind of creepy. Like, I was thinking of Pinocchio, the never growing up thing, like with the donkeys in there. Kind of this warped view of childhood. Like, the thing about childhood is that it's fleeting, you know? But also a land of adventure, because you have pirates and engines and sword fights and crocodiles and forts and caves and all stuff like that. So it really takes you to a sense of childhood adventure, which speaks to what you were saying earlier. It's like the Disneyland idea, like a place you can go where you can be a kid and where adventure makes your heart soar, I guess.
What I wonder, and it's not explicitly answered in this film, I think a couple adaptations have tackled it, but do the pirates age? How long have the pirates been there, and are they also frozen in the bubble that the kids are? I think they are, but we hear that the pirate crew is grumbling. They're like, oh, we've been here too long. We should be able to leave. And Captain Hook doesn't want to because he's got this vendetta against Peter Pan. But I would think they, you know, if it does confer this same immortality, that they might want to stay. Hard to say.
Yeah. Because we kind of are pretty explicitly told that Peter Pan's group of comrades called the Lost Boys are basically kids who have left the earthly plane and gone to Neverland and never left the plane. Because they talk about like vaguely remembering that they had a mom, but don't remember it specifically because they've been lost in this dream world for forever, you know? But you're right, we don't get any answer or explanation on that for the the pirates, because that is the first thing we see in Neverland is we see the pirates. So they're the antagonists of the film. They're led by Captain Hook and his assistant Smee. So, Brian, tell us about Captain Hook. When you think of Captain Hook, what do you think?
So one of the earliest Halloween costumes I can ever remember wearing was I had a nice Captain Hook costume. But he's got this long black ringlets of hair and a big fancy red pirate jacket and pirate hat. He has a hook for a hand. That's the key namesake feature. And he's a gentleman pirate. He's like a fop. He's got that same Hans Conried energy that Dr. T had. Where what were some adjectives we used in that case? I think we said metrosexual. Dress me, dress me, dress me in my domi-do duds. Captain Hook would be on board with that sentiment as well.
He is a great piece of animation, of character animation.
Yeah, he gets in a lot of slapstick situations, too.
Yeah. So you really get to see it.
There's a lot of him getting bonked around by various things.
But I just love his flowing robes and his flowing feather. And he's got this long, bushy hair, too. He's appealing to watch on screen. He's not very scary. And I don't think of him as particularly funny. Like, he gets in hijinks, but, like, I don't know how much the hijinks actually made me laugh. That does make an odd villain when he's neither funny nor scary. I mean, maybe you disagree. Do you think he's funny, Brian? Like, what's your take on Hook?
I feel like he's more relatable.
Okay.
It's like when you just got this kid who's causing problems for you all the time. I mean, he's just trying to do his pirate thing.
Oh, yeah, Peter Pan's the worst, man. I do not like Peter Pan. He's obnoxious. He's like the worst kind of 10-year-old boy you've ever had to encounter. Thinks everything's about him. Thinks he's the funniest guy in the world. Is just, like, competent enough as a person to cause serious trouble in the world. So you can't, like, take your eyes off him. But also is not competent enough to, like, actually operate in that world in any meaningful way. Yeah, he's annoying. He takes people's affections for granted, too.
So Captain Hook, at the same time, is he's got a one-track mind, and you gotta think maybe there's something to what Smee is saying. It's like, maybe if you just try something else with your life, don't be so devoted to getting revenge on a 10-year-old. It's like, just try a new tack, and it might work out better for you.
Right, because Hook's thing is singularly on destroying Peter Pan, killing him, I guess. Eradicating him from Neverland. And yeah, it is kind of peculiar. Like, were it me, I would be trying to steer as far clear of the annoying 10-year-old as I possibly could, but that's not Hook's approach. He's got to snuff him out.
And part of the vengeance plot is motivated by the fact that Peter Pan is responsible for the hook.
That's right.
Peter Pan cut off his hand and threw the hand to a crocodile, and somehow also a clock got into the crocodile, and what has not been clear to me is, was Hook holding the clock when the hand went into the crocodile, or was it two completely separate incidents? Does this croc just swallow all kinds of things?
It is kind of odd that there's two swallowed things that are key. One is the hand and one is the clock, because I do like this crocodile might be my favorite piece of animation in the whole film. It's just a very expressive little playful crocodile. He actually did make me laugh. Like, his eyes poke up out of the water in a funny way, and he's always ticking and he's chasing after. He's got kind of like a dog-like energy to him. Like, his tongue is hanging out, slobbering, trying to chomp on all the pirates, more so than like a big menacing creature. He's like a big scary dog, I guess.
And the way that the croc can be present via the sound, and that will suddenly change the whole mood. I like that. That's a great story idea.
When the ticking just comes in, right? That's good. Tick, tick. It's like, uh-oh, here he is. There's a great shot where Smee hears the ticking and his ears get all big, like he's hearing it and processing that the crocodile is here.
And I don't know if... well, you've probably noticed this type of thing, but when groupings of Disney films are like concurrent or in quick succession. Like there will be periods for a couple years where a lot of the same people get reused. Like nowadays, what's his name? Tudyk. Alan Tudyk is in every movie.
Oh, the actors, you mean? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But in the 50s, especially between Alice in Wonderland and this one, so 1951 and 1953, it's almost like a one-to-one it's almost like a one-to-one cast match.
Oh, interesting.
So Catherine Beaumont as Wendy was also Alice, is one of the big ones. And then Smee was the White Rabbit. I think both have got Candy Candido, the guy with the ridiculously deep voice who's the Indian chief. He popped up in a few roles in Disney movies.
Okay.
He was like the alligator in Robin Hood, and he was a few different things. But I found that interesting. Actually, I think a lot of the pirates in the pirate crew were voiced by the Smee actor.
Oh, really?
I think so. Like doing different accents. Like one's the Swedish pirate and one's the German pirate, but it sounded like it was all the same voice to me. I haven't confirmed that.
I thought where you were going with that, talking about reused characters, that you meant character designs, because I was struck that Mrs. Darling, her design looks a lot like the princess version of Cinderella, which came just a few years earlier.
That is true, too. That is a great note, and absolutely true, because you see that same character model as the older sister of Alice at the beginning of Alice in Wonderland, also very similar to Katrina in 1949 Sleepy Hollow.
And then, just to bring that to modern day, I mean, basically every princess has been Rapunzel since Rapunzel. Just variations on Rapunzel, you know? Elsa and Anna both have the Rapunzel look. They've kind of deviated from it a little bit in the recent ones, but definitely there's like the princess type that they did for a while in the 2010s. So at this point, we're like, it's kind of a weirdly structured story. We're like 25 minutes into, maybe more than that, honestly. And like, literally, we've just had the setup. Like, they've just gotten to Neverland and we've met the characters. And it's only a 75-minute play. So we're talking like we're nearly halfway done with the runtime here. We haven't even gotten to like what is ostensibly like the arc of conflict. I mean, I guess overall it's like their visit to Neverland and their return. But like the main bit of problem that hits them that they need to solve is that the Indian princess, who's named Tiger Lily, gets kidnapped by Hook as part of this scheme to basically have the blame be laying upon Peter Pan so that Peter Pan can get the wrath of the Indians. I think that's the gist of the conspiracy, right? Like,
right, a frame-up job.
And the Indians will be mad at Peter Pan, yeah. So now the Indians kind of abduct all of the Lost Boys and the Darlings, and it's up to Wendy and Peter Pan to find Tiger Lily before the timer imposed by the chief to find his daughter has been fulfilled. So it's kind of a thin story, but you've said in the past, these Disney movies in general, they just kind of fly by. It's like 75 minutes is pretty short for a feature.
Right, they move really fast.
A couple things on this. One thing, because I probably should have thrown it in earlier, but just a thought that I had here. The name Wendy, it's a very interesting story on this. So there's like some documented use of it prior to the play. It wasn't like he totally invented it, but it was a very rare name. And for all we know, maybe he actually kind of did invent it. It just happened to exist elsewhere. But J.M. Barrie is attributed with inventing that name, or popularizing it at least.
Right. It definitely blew up in the wake of him using it. I've heard that it's kind of like a diminutive of Gwendolyn, maybe?
Right. That's what I was going to say is I have a daughter named Gwendolyn, and we don't call her Wendy. Sometimes I call her Gwendy, which is similar, I guess. I knew a girl in high school who went by Wendy, whose full name was Gwendolyn. And I read this book a while ago. I don't know if you ever encountered these, Brian. I think they were more popular than like 10 years ago than they are now, or gosh, 10 years is underselling it, probably almost 20 years ago than they are now. But it was like this whole line of blank and philosophy. So it was like some pop culture franchise and philosophy, I think is what it was. So I had one that was Bruce Springsteen and philosophy. So, you know, Bruce Springsteen, one of my favorite musical artists. And so what this was, it was like each chapter was like an essay by some writer who had some background in some academic subject, usually philosophy, connecting that pop culture thing to some idea, basically. And so I read one that basically explored the song Born to Run by Bruce Springsteen in this book I had back to Peter Pan, because the woman that Bruce addresses in that song is Wendy. So I've always kind of thought of that as like Wendy being this kind of prototypical young woman who's still like pure is maybe not the right word because that has maybe too much of a sexual connotation to it, but like who is still optimistic and idealistic about the world and has not yet been tarnished by the cynicism of adulthood. And so I just think that's kind of cool that like he took this name and had it almost capture a whole essence to it. So we briefly mentioned the mermaids. At one point, Peter goes to talk to the mermaids, and this whole sequence is kind of strange. First of all, the colors in this are like a little more abstract. I thought ethereal almost.
Yeah, so Mary Blair, the artist, was very involved with the colors and the art design of this film. And she was the one responsible, like, entirely for the art direction of It's a Small World.
Okay.
So you can see that same vibe of just, like, solid color next to very different solid color in this movie. She also did a lot in Alice in Wonderland.
You're right that these mermaids are strange because they're like jealous too of Wendy. Like all the other women are jealous of Wendy when Peter Pan's showing his attention, like you said. But they also, I don't know, they're like not childlike at all. They're like kind of like Tinkerbell, look more like grown women, or at least like post-pubescent women, I would say, which is again different from Wendy and also kind of different from Tiger Lily, I would say. So just kind of some weird things going on. Like I kind of feel like this whole story, at least in the telling of Walt Disney, who purportedly wanted to do like a darker version initially, kind of more in the Pinocchio vein, but in the Silver Age, post-Cinderella era, decided to make it a little bit more kid-friendly, like really focused directly at kids rather than kind of the more universal Golden Age movies.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think you can see how he like kind of sanded it down to make it just more playful and silly and cutting away. I don't know. I just felt like it was, I don't know the original play and book, so I don't know, but it felt like it was kind of grappling for some more sophisticated thematic content and metaphor and commentary that Peter Pan, the 1953 movie, just kind of turns into playful incident, just scenario. Like there's not, it's kind of not really engaging with the core of the coming of age stuff in here. Like it's got a little bit of it, but it's sanded it down a lot.
Yeah, I think you're right. I would really recommend watch the stage show, the musical.
Yeah, and you sent me, it's apparently the whole thing's up on YouTube, so you can watch it.
But I do like, what the mermaids do is they try to drown Wendy. They don't just keep it in word, they move to deed. They're trying to drag her down, and she's like smacking at him with a shell. But I like that. So when she was telling the stories at the beginning, like that was the big thing that she wanted to see in the first place was, see the mermaids. But they turn out to not be what she was expecting.
They literally try to kill her. Probably something you could say there, like the things that you want are the things that do you in, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so part of his abduction scheme is for Hook to try and figure out from Tiger Lily where the base, the secret base, is that the word that they use? I can't remember. That the HQ.
Basically their hideout.
Yeah, for Peter Pan and the Lost Boys. And it kind of culminates in this big cave scene that has this big Peter Pan Hook sword fight. And I thought this was a pretty cool little set piece here. it's a good payoff on the buildup of Captain Hook and Peter Pan as rivals. It had a little bit of vibes of like Empire Strikes Back, Luke Skywalker versus Darth Vader lightsaber battle. And also, I was thinking of Harry Potter 6, the one where they go to try and find the Horcrux in the ocean cave. The setting really reminded me of that, where it's got like a sinister element to it almost. And Peter Pan is doing a lot of like voice throwing stuff too to try and trick Smee and trick Hook. But it culminates in this sword fight. So I thought this was a pretty fun little sequence.
Yeah, I agree. And also, I mean, kind of presaging the Pirates of the Caribbean at Disneyland. That wasn't an opening day attraction. That was like a 1960s edition. But I can definitely see the germ here.
So Peter Pan does free Tiger Lily, but then kind of the second part of this whole scheme is that Hook realizes that Tinkerbell is really mad at Peter Pan and manipulates her, pours compliments and all this stuff upon her, and gets her to reveal where the base is. Now the Darlings and the Lost Boys have escaped the Indians, but now they're captured by the pirates. And so we get this final scene with the pirates. There's this little funny song and dance number that I liked about joining up with Captain Hook, where the pirates are doing this really funny little dance, holding these flags, waving them around like color guard, but they're like the pirate skull and crossbones flag. And it eventually culminates in Wendy needing to walk the plank, but Peter Pan comes back in time and they end up getting all the pirates to fall into the water. And in particular, Hook, he does like the don't ever call me chicken gag from Back to the Future, but gets Peter Pan to agree to do a sword fight, except he won't use his magic flying ability. So it'll be like a man-to-man fight. We'll be standing on ground, except in this case, ground is like the upper mast of a pirate ship to do their battle. And Peter Pan does win. He uses like the pirate flag to wrap up Hook and knock him into the water. And I think my understanding is in the most adaptations, Hook actually gets full on eaten. But in the cartoon, he just gets chased around by some more. He actually gets temporarily eaten, but then bounces out of the crocodile.
Right, he like clonks down through the body all the way to the tail and then springs back out again.
Brian, you sent me a funny YouTube video of, I forget the name of that YouTuber.
So there's this guy on YouTube, ProZD is the channel, and he does like voice acting type stuff. But one of the videos is, he says, I can recite Peter Pan from memory, and it's this scene, the sword fight, where they're climbing around on the masts. And so he's not just doing the lines, but he's also like describing everything like 2 seconds ahead of when it's going to happen. And it's a pretty good parlor trick.
Yeah, I like that. And then after this, they sail on back. They take over the pirate ship and they use it to sail back to the earthly plane, back to London. We see Big Ben, I think. We see Mr. and Mrs. Darling arrive back home after their night out. And Wendy talks about how she saw Peter Pan and they went on that adventure. And I think it's supposed to be like was it a dream or was it not a dream type thing? But there's like a little thing where they see the pirate ship in the sky, but it's also kind of a cloud. So it's not quite clear whether it's really we're seeing the pirate ship in the sky. I don't know. What's your take on all this, Brian?
Well, the very last line of the movie. So Mr. Darling, the parents come in and Mr. Darling says, well, if you want to stay in the nursery a few more nights, it doesn't have to be tonight. There's no apocalyptic threshold moment happening here. Like, you don't have to grow up all in an instant. And then he looks out the window and he sees the ship, or maybe a cloud that looks like a ship, and he says, I seem to remember seeing that ship myself when I was very young. So the idea that this is a cycle that repeats and that Peter Pan has always been a factor. He's always been a known entity that can whisk children away, but only children. And that you kind of lose that connection when you grow up. That's very much like expounded upon in the play.
Mm-hmm.
And actually in the play, there's an epilogue that jumps ahead. Like when Wendy leaves Neverland, she makes Peter promise, like, okay, well, come get me again in a year. And then he doesn't come back until, like, years and years later. He comes back, and he's still a kid, and she's a grown woman, and he ends up taking the daughter to Neverland. So, like a Puff the Magic Dragon thing. Dragons live forever, but not so little boys. That it's like a generational thing.
Interesting.
And that was the hook that they used for Return to Neverland. It's also in Hook. That in that case, Maggie Smith, McGonagall, plays old Wendy, and like Peter Pan came back and was so like smitten by the daughter that he married the daughter and stayed around in Earth and grew up. And that's how you get Robin Williams' adult Peter Pan.
Interesting. Yeah, I got to see Hook at some point. That sounds kind of fascinating. Brian, as you were describing that last twist, it made me think of this movie that came out this year. Have you seen Orion in the Dark? It's an animated movie on Netflix.
I have not.
So I'm going to spoil Orion in the Dark. So jump ahead 30 seconds. Brian, cover your ears if you don't want to hear it. So at first, it's like kind of one of those inside out concepts come alive stories. Except in this case, it's different aspects of night. And the main one is dark. And so there's this boy who encounters dark. This boy's afraid of everything. And he meets dark. And dark is like, well, let me show you what really goes on in the night. And like whisks Orion, the boy, away. And through that, Orion learns like what really happens at night. And it's okay to be scared of things. But we also need to accept that there's unknown, scary things in the world. And that's okay, you know? But what's really interesting about this story is that at about the halfway point, it like does a smash cut. And we realize that what we've been watching has been told by a dad who looks like the grown-up Orion to a girl, a young girl. So it's like he's telling the story to a girl, and we see that she is scared at bedtime, which was like, is what happened to Orion in the original. And then a little bit later in the movie, it zooms out again, and we see that now that woman has grown up and is telling the story to her kid who's scared. So, like, this idea of stories being passed down as a way for us to, like, cope with the world around us. It's very interesting. And it's actually written by Charlie Kaufman, who's known for these kind of cerebral works. Like, he wrote Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, these kind of structurally ambitious, high-concept stories that often deal with dark concepts. So overall, I mean, I think I gave it a 5 because it's really kind of a bland example of the trope until it becomes this totally different thing that's more about like the very nature of storytelling at the halfway point. The animation's kind of underwhelming too, but it's just a very interesting concept. And so if you're looking for more of that, like stories being passed down from generation, I recommend that one.
Yeah, I'd heard mixed things, but that is kind of cool. In the Peter Pan epilogue, when Peter Pan shows up and Wendy is older, she says, "I'm old now, Peter. Ever so much more than 20. And I think about that pretty frequently. I'm old now. Ever so much more than 20.
That's pretty funny. I mean, I guess technically for the rest of your life, you're ever so much more than 20. Like, once you hit, I don't know, like 27, you could say that about yourself for the rest of time. So, Brian, before we wrap, and of course, we're going to be recording our Disney song draft in a bit. Any other Peter Pan ephemera, thoughts, observations, moments we didn't hit on, favorites, least favorites?
Sure, that's a good touch point, is we didn't really mention the music. We name dropped You Can Fly, but what did you think of the music in this one overall?
I think it's fine. There's a couple of iconic numbers. Following the Leaders in this one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or am I wrong? Yeah. And there's one or two other songs, but I can't say oh, and of course there's What Makes the Red Man Red.
A classic.
But I can't say that it really stuck with me. But I don't know. What about you? What's your take on the music, Brian?
The big one for me is the opener. I really like Second Star to the Right. This was back in the Silver Age, as you mentioned, and in the early Disney movies, they always started with opening credits, and during the opening credits, you would get some kind of song that would play.
Mm-hmm. Opening bangers. Yeah.
Right, and often it was like a tone setter, like an emotional starting point.
And so you like this one?
Yeah, I do.
I need to listen to it again and before our draft.
And when our journey is through, each time we say goodnight, we'll thank the little star that shines the second from the right. And yeah, it's like establishing this idea that you travel, whether it be in reality or dreams, and you come back with something gained, and that this is like the dreamland of childhood. But also, I like the instrumental stuff as well. Like, there's this kind of little leitmotif for Peter Pan where he goes, like this 3-note, almost a whistle thing. A 3-note little jingle for Peter Pan that I thought always works well.
And Brian, you had this ranked pretty high on your Walt Disney Animation Studio ranking when we did that top 5 not too long ago.
I did. So, yeah, for people who may not have heard that episode a couple weeks back, I recently watched all the Disney movies that I hadn't seen before. Peter Pan I had seen before, as I mentioned. And I ended up slotting it pretty high, and that mostly for me is just because I feel it's so tied into the idea of Disneyland. Like the theme park escapist ethos. And kind of that whole 50s thing, too. Just like part of the culture of the 50s that would give birth to that same idea of Disneyland.
That's good. I like that reasoning. Anything else you want to shout out, or shall we rate, Brian?
I don't know. What about you, Dan? Anything else?
Well, I guess what I would say is I found the humans, and I guess maybe that's not the right term. I found the darlings, and even to some extent Peter Pan, to be fairly bland as character designs and animations. They're just kind of like the generic Silver Age Disney humans. I think Hook and Smee and the alligator and Tinkerbell are all pretty awesome. And some of the other side characters get moments too. The pirates and there's some cool Indians. Some of it's kind of shticky. Like there's a bunch of stuff. There's like 3 times throughout this where someone is doing something without looking, and then the thing that they're not looking at gets replaced. So one is when Smee is shaving Hook and he looks away, but he ends up shaving the butt of a bird. And another one is when one Indian is kissing another Indian, and like a saggy old lady Indian comes into place and he goes and kisses her, and now he's accidentally kissing an old ugly Indian. And I feel like there's one other one in there, but some of that animation is kind of fun.
And I'll just praise again when Peter flies. It always looks good. And then there's times when he'll like fly through and slash the sails of the ship, and just the way that the light and the layers all compound together is well done.
There's one shot that I really noticed the effectiveness of the multi-plane animation, and it's like a POV shot of Hook climbing up a ladder or a rope or something, and you see him like approaching the camera, and it's just a really nifty shot. I also wondered to what extent this movie is responsible for popularizing some pirate tropes, like having a hook, walking the plank, knife between your teeth, or whether that was stuff that already predated it and was already very popular and well recognized, like probably from Treasure Island or I don't know what else.
Right. That's a good question. Maybe we should do a pirate month sometime.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure the hook, though, I think that originated with Peter Pan. I feel like if you're going to name the character Hook, that might be the starting point.
The Nexus. The Hook Nexus. What else? I don't know. Still think the structure is kind of odd, the narrative structure of just the pacing of it. There's not really an arc per se. Like I don't even whose growth arc is it? I guess Wendy's.
I would guess it's Wendy's arc, but even that is kind of downplayed here. It's very episodic. In the stage show, there's a line that says, because the island is so small, there's no space between the adventures. It's just like it's jam-packed with things happening. And so, yeah, things don't always lead one into the other than by proximity.
So I'm going to talk us into our rating section. Is It Good is our signature section where we each give the movie a rating on our 8-point goodness scale, ranging from very not good, which is a 1 out of 8, to our masterpiece rating toward a good, which is an 8 out of 8. So Brian, is Peter Pan, the 1953 version of the Walt Disney Animation Studio canon, good?
So maybe I was a little out of whack when I rated it quite so high as I did on my Letterboxd list, but I do think it's well done. I think even if it's episodic, it's at least kind of cohesive. It does a good job setting up this space that you could dream of going to. And I love the colors. I like the music. I really like Captain Hook and just his energy of being this put upon guy seemingly trapped in this cycle. I like the real world too. And seeing the city at night, being able to fly over the city at night in this pre-airplane era is a cool idea. So I'm going to give it like the highest of 6s, I think, of 8. 6 of 8, which we call very good, just outside of the 7 territory. Because I think it's evocative and the imagery is really strong. What about you, Dan?
So you've probably gathered from my comments, I felt like this one did not hold up for me. I'm a little torn because, back when this is kind of a semi-related anecdote. Back when we talked about Dracula, I mentioned how the old school Dracula I just didn't really get a lot out of watching it. Like, I felt like it was stuck in that early talkie stiffness, and that made for like a really slow watch. And you kind of said, well, that's not wrong, but you also got to put some respect on the name because it's Dracula, It's a central piece of culture. And Peter Pan is maybe not quite so central, but honestly, maybe it is, because you're right, it's like a Disney touchstone and everybody knows the Disney movies. So like it kind of is this central thing. So how much do I owe it to Peter Pan 1953 to just give it its due, as opposed to be a cynic, be a grump? I'm going to be a grump. The other big question is like, the animation is good. It's even mid-tier Disney animation is like so pleasing to look at, particularly from the hand-drawn era. It's nice to look at. And so how much am I going to let the annoyances drag me down? Because I do have annoyances when it's really nice to look at, even if it's not Disney's absolute best, it is nice to look at. It's no Sleeping Beauty as far as beautiful animation goes. It's no Pinocchio, but it's a Disney movie, But the annoyances really come down to the fact that it's just a cartoon. It's just a kid's movie. Like there's nothing to really, I don't know. You use the word cohesive, which is like the opposite of the word that I would use. It just felt like a bunch of little things that happen that sometimes they fit together and sometimes they don't fit together. And then we're done. We're back in London. We woke up from the dream, And like anytime there could be subtext, let's scrub the subtext away. So it's just, oh, we're little kids going on an adventure to Neverland. Huzzah. Oh, isn't Captain Hook silly? I don't find Captain Hook particularly inspiring as a villain either. I'm sorry I'm going to be so grumpy here. I don't think I like it as much as Alice in Wonderland, and I gave Alice in Wonderland a 4. Would I give this one as low as a 3? I don't know. I guess I'll give it the lowest 4. No, you know what? I said I'll be a grump. I'm going to stick to my grumpiness. I'm going to give this like the highest possible 3 out of 8. Right verging into 4, with the asterisk that maybe I'll feel warmer to it if I watch it again. And you kind of got to respect it and like at least know it and watch it and admire the things that it does well, even if it doesn't hold together into a whole package.
Well, it's good. It's been a while since we had a gap as wide as 3 points. Maybe I should have made it even bigger and gone with the 7, but I think we talked it through. I think we are pretty clear on how we feel. and I'm glad that we gave it a watch.
Yeah. And so, listeners, I will catch you very soon with Brian, with a couple others, on our Walt Disney Animation Studio song draft. We'll catch you then, Brian. We'll catch you then, listeners. Oh, and Brian, what are we going to be watching next week?
So for our next episode, I wanted to pay homage to Roger Corman, who just passed at the age of, 99, 98, something like that, after having his hand in the movie industry for a really, really long time. Like, there were movies he directed, there were movies he produced, and then even towards the end, he was just like throwing a little bit of money and putting his name on projects. And so what I would like us to watch is the original The Little Shop of Horrors from 1960, as well as the Ashman and Menken musical Little Shop of Horrors.
Cool. So we're going to watch both of them. I've never seen either of them. We'll talk about the connection, I assume, to the one we already talked about, Bucket of Blood. But there's also a Disney connection here, I think, because didn't Ashman Menken write the score for Little Shop of Horrors, the remake?
Yes. So the Little Shop of Horrors movie so it was a stage show first, and then they made the movie, which is like 86. And it was pretty much off of the success of that they were recruited to do Little Mermaid. They had this Broadway reputation as rising stars, and then became part of the Disney stable.
Alrighty, Brian, I'm looking forward to it. I've never seen either, and I'm excited to. Catch you later, listeners. Catch you later, Brian.